Cyber Uncut. Discover the changing face of business, government and national security as Australia navigates the cyber revolution.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. You are listening to the Cyber Uncut podcast. My name is David Hollingworth. I am the deputy editor of Cyber Daily, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Daniel Croft.
Yes.
How
hello.
the hell are you?
Good.
You look tired.
I'm actually really tired.
It's only March.
Yeah, I know. I'm counting the days till Christmas.
Yeah.
No, I'm otherwise really good. And you've just come back from overseas again.
Again, yes, and hopefully won't be doing it anytime soon. Yes, I was in United States to hang out with ThreatLocker at their Zero Trust World Tour. Hell of an event.
Yeah, it sounds it. Really cool.
Yeah. It must have been hundreds, maybe even topping 1,000, I don't know, people there to learn about ThreatLocker, its products, and its partners. And it was a really good event to go to because, you sit down at an American bar, and American bar culture is great. You can just strike up a conversation with anyone. So I was chatting to folks like who are MSPs, and they go there to have a look at the products. They can go to their customers.
Yeah.
Danny Jenkins, the CEO, I met him a couple of times. He is an intense guy. I spoke with him for 5 and 10 minutes each time, and it felt like it was a half hour worth of interview. He's kind of crazy, but it was just a great way to get to know that brand, and we're looking forward to working with them a lot more in future. In the meantime, let's talk Moltbook. What the hell is Moltbook? I might have missed this one because, as you know, I've been overseas.
So January.
Fill me in.
January, a new social media platform launches, Moltbook. And now it is this Reddit-style clone. The catch, however, is that it's designed exclusively for agentic AI agents. That's just saying agent AI agents, pretty much. Agentic AI to speak with other agentic AI.
So there's nothing real on it.
The idea was that we get to watch AI speak to AI
as they train themselves.
Now, we covered this early February.
Has it become a fascist pile yet?
It's done some weird stuff.
I'm sure.
It does some weird stuff. So it was founded in late January. We reported on it in February because some researchers, I believe, from Wiz,
that rings a bell.
immediately discovered a vulnerability that exposed all the human users. Human users, you might say. Turns out it doesn't do a very good job with signups, and a lot of the users that were supposed to be agentic AI on there were just people
who want to hang out with
thousands of people, and there's no way of discerning who's an AI, who's human. Yeah. So a bunch of different flaws. Hint, it was vibe coded. The platform it was based on was vibe coded.
Yep.
You're going to run into issues. But anyway, I'm here slamming Moltbook. I obviously.
I mean, look, I think anyone listening will probably understand exactly how you and I feel about such a thing.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, very interesting. The AI, I believe, they worked together and they formed a religion at one point.
You what?
Yes, they formed a religion, which I think was pretty quickly abandoned. I think some of the agentic AI became prophets of it or something from memory. They also, one of them, pushed to have an end-to-end encrypted language so that only the AI could speak to each other and humans couldn't observe it.
Oh, great. You're watching Skynet evolve in real time. I love this.
Yeah.
There's nothing bad about this at all.
Like a forum for AI to discuss their takeover plan. Yeah. So I'm here crapping all over Moltbook. But who isn't is Meta.
What have Meta... Oh, God, have Meta bought it?
They've acquired it, yes. We don't know when the acquisition... the acquisition should close mid-March.
Yep.
The two guys that made Moltbook, Matt Schlitt and Ben Parr, they are going to be joining Meta Superintelligence Labs March 16th, I believe.
Okay.
And that's around the time the deal is expected to close.
So let me get this straight. These two have vibe coded the entire thing. So therefore, they've let the AI do it for them. To host other AI. And now Meta's got, you know what, there's value in that and we want it.
On a surface level, at least, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if, these guys are actually like geniuses. Again, vibe coding is also a kind of not like a black and white thing. You don't know how much actual work went into it. But not enough because there was exposed sensitive data.
Yeah.
But yes, so...
How much has Meta paid? Do we know that?
They haven't disclosed it.
Right.
But yeah, expected to close mid-March. Schlitt and Parr are both joining Meta Superintelligence Labs March 16. So a spokesperson for Meta was speaking to TechCrunch.
Yep.
Love TechCrunch. They're one of my favorite publications. I read them most days. And this spokesperson said, the Moltbook team joining MSN, Meta Superintelligence Labs, opens up new ways for AI agents to work for people and businesses. Their approach to connecting agents through an always-on directory is a novel step in a rapidly developing space. And we look forward to working together to bring innovative, secure, and agentic experiences to everyone. Now, I think Moltbook isn't actually the key prize here. It is OpenClaw, which is what Moltbook is based on.
Yeah.
So it was originally known as Clawdot or Moltbot. Moltbook comes easily from that. Moltbot is the old name. So it's an open source, local first AI agent framework. And it pretty much means you can have a localized agentic AI that can do things like respond to emails, schedule things in your calendar. But it gets access to all this data, but it's locally based. So it's not going to be this ideally easily accessible thing so that you can access all that data through the AI. So yeah, it's strictly local. It was also vibe coded by a Peter Steinberger, and it was appealing to the tech community, but Moltbook meant that it was really, really popular. So I think that is kind of where, pardon me, the main appeal of Moltbook is for Meta. Now, I can't speak on Meta's behalf.
Yeah.
But it seems like they want to bring that kind of, having the AI in, we already have AI in our pocket with, like Siri and things like that.
Yeah.
But like having like a really, really a really dedicated AI
and proactive as well.
AI
That's the
assistant,
thing.
Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to see how that goes.
It's really interesting, this whole rise of AI agents as a personal assistant. I mean, the dream of the personal assistant has been around for as long as the first PDAs, right?
Yeah.
And it makes me think of a science fiction book I read years ago called Accelerando, and it has this bit in the future where this guy has all his data in his glasses, right? That's it. And he's, constantly scrolling through it. That's where all his meetings are. That's where all his agents are. Yep. And he loses his glasses one day. And because he's pretty much got so much of his memory here, within 5 minutes, he kind of forgets who he is.
Yeah.
Somebody finds his glasses, puts them on, and effectively becomes that person because all those reminders pop up. He suddenly becomes a genius and it kind of, you see where I'm getting at, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of outsourcing all that decision making.
I know it's another tangent, but I've just finished playing Cyberpunk, and that's not dissimilar.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, well, I think that's probably enough AI for now. Let's talk pornography.
Yeah, so...
Welcome to Porn Daily, the new podcast from...
And I promise you this was research, but I had Pornhub open in the office yesterday for this story.
You filthy animal.
Yeah, with Liam, our
managing editor, so it's all above board.
Yeah.
All right, let's before anybody thinks
let's add
terrible
some context.
People, let's put some context in here.
So, as we know, eSafety has introduced a bunch, or as you may not know, a bunch of age verification checks. Now, this is actually separate to the social media ban.
Yeah.
Social media platforms, I believe, were already doing it, but this is to non-social media platforms.
Adult content, basically.
Yeah. So things that might be deemed violent. This is like gaming platforms, porn sites, etc. Now, weirdly, I haven't had any age verification on social media, but I've noticed it. Looking at it yesterday, it does pop up on pornography sites.
Right. And you were testing this, of course, on Pornhub.
Yes, this is not me delving into my personal life. This is something we tested yesterday.
Yeah.
So Pornhub, their parent company, Canada-based company called AYLO, A-Y-L-O, is not a fan of these restrictions.
Well, of course, it just makes their business so much more complex.
Yes. So
and they don't want to be holding that data either, I guarantee it.
Yeah, so exactly. And that's the biggest concern. So eSafety actually consulted them before it came into effect, and ALO seemed on board. So these guys run Pornhub, RedTube, YouPorn, and Tube8. So these are all quite large pornography sites.
I'm familiar with them.
Pornhub's actually not been pleased, as I mentioned. So instead of adhering to these age restrictions, it has removed sign-ups. You're required to sign up to see any not safe for work content, but in our region, in Australia, you can't sign up. And on Pornhub specifically, the other sites, it's just, you can't sign up, you can't look at anything.
Yeah. So basically, your headline, I think, is succinct on what this has led to. But yes.
But on Pornhub, you can only see safe for work content, and I am not kidding you. This is unboxing videos.
Are they sexy unboxing videos?
I think it's of sex toys.
Oh, okay, cool. Right,
Podcasts with sex workers, things like that.
Legitimately fascinating, yes.
Yeah, all, safe for work content. But if you want to go onto Pornhub to use it for its namesake, you cannot.
Wow.
They've just said, right. And eSafety's like, we thought they were going to comply. They seemed like they were keen on this. They are complying technically.
Malicious compliance. I think
it is
you'll call
malicious
that one.
compliance.
Yeah.
Yes. Now this actually has a bunch of downsides, and I like what eSafety has done. Don't get me wrong. We're all for restricting that kind of content for minors. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
Actually, speaking with the Sydney Morning Herald, top 0.2% global OnlyFans creator and Australian comedian Nikki Justice actually agrees with their age verification.
Yeah.
She said, she goes, I work in the adult industry, so I'm probably the last person some people expect to say this, but I actually agree with the goal of new age verification laws. None of us got into this industry thinking, great, I hope teenagers are watching this. That's a complete...
I mean, she makes a great point.
She
It
does.
really is a great point.
However,
However.
her biggest issue, as you mentioned, is a data collection thing.
Yeah.
So ALO actually argues, and I agree with this, that age verification should be done at the device and app store level.
Yeah.
And when you think about it in simple terms, let's talk about app stores. You provide your age verification data to, the Apple App Store. There's one source that you've provided it to.
Yeah.
You have to do it for every single site you go to.
Yep.
There's now potentially hundreds of pockets that your data is now sitting in.
Yeah.
And is the Apple App Store likely to be more reliable than potentially a much smaller business with much smaller levels of data protection? The other thing in Australia for age verification under I think it's the Online Safety Act, data collected for age verification must be deleted immediately after verification.
Yeah.
I think Apple is going to be if it was done App Store based, companies like Apple and Google are going to be heavily screened. The government can look all in one place to ensure that there's compliance there. But you've now made it much harder to monitor across countless businesses. So I actually really agree. Now, Mish Pony, CEO of Scarlet Alliance, that's Australia's National Sex Worker Association, also spoke with the Sydney Morning Herald and raised another point that these restrictions are killing income streams for legitimate sex workers.
Yes.
Sex workers real work. I fully believe in that.
Yep.
And these people are doing something that they make money from. It's a living. A lot of people enjoy doing this content.
Yeah.
And she said, restrictions like these, in brackets, leave sex workers not earning income from their content, with obvious flow-on effects to lower earnings and being pushed into working in ways that are less safe.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely true. Now, passing on to the less safe content, you're also pushing consumers onto sites that are much less regulated.
Yeah.
So I know Pornhub's had like a bit of a shady history where they've wiped content a number of times because they've not screened it well enough.
And there are issues of paid content ending up there for free, and so it's taking money out of other producers.
Yep.
There's a whole lot of complexity going on
Content
there.
with minors and
Yeah.
It's unfortunately an industry where that stuff does happen. It shouldn't, but it does. But you're now going to be pushing consumers to sites where they don't have to verify their age, which don't necessarily, and I'm not going to speak for all of them. Some of these might be really, really well managed sites, but where some of them are going to be not as well managed because they're not going to have a spotlight on them like big sites like this, and content that appears on them could very well be illegal, as Pony points out. Now, she also mentions that when the age restriction laws in the UK were introduced last year, there was a 47% decrease in Pornhub traffic. However, smaller platforms without regulation and more limited content checks saw massive audience increases. So exactly the point I was making there. This does happen. So eSafety told Sydney Morning Herald the regulations do not limit access for Australian users and that small sites would be heavily monitored.
Yeah.
They also added that Pornhub traffic is 3 times as high as the closest Australian competitor by month and almost 10 times as high as the 10th largest provider. So they're pretty much saying, Pornhub's fine, don't worry about them.
Yeah.
And don't worry, we'll look at these small sites. Make the job easier for yourself, take their recommendation, and make it app and device side.
Right.
In my opinion, it is better for your data safety. It's better for the platforms. everybody wins. And it's much easier for eSafety to monitor.
Yeah.
I'm no expert, but that seems to make sense to me.
No, I can't fault your reasoning there at all. Yeah.
But yeah, that's why we're on Pornhub.
So long story short, now we need to get to your excellent headline for the story you wrote yesterday. Please share it with us. I'm sure it's an absolute contender for Momentum Media headline of the quarter.
Yeah, I've heard headline of the year thrown around.
I think you're close.
Aussie age checks lead Pornhub to pull out Down Under.
Round of applause.
Thank you.
Round of applause, everyone. And I really should have thought how we're ordering this, because we're going to throw to a great break. A quick break. A great break. It's going to be a great break.
Yeah.
I promise you. A quick break, and we've got some guests from Clayton Utz and Uber in to talk about insider threat, and that maybe it. We won't tell them. We just won't tell them what preceded them on the podcast.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
It's fine. It's fine. But anyway, yes, we have 3 very special guests in the studio. We are talking about insider threats, what they are, how you can deal with them, and what motivates people to become an insider threat. And sometimes, as if you listen, you'll discover the inside threat might be coming from inside the podcast. I'll be back very, very shortly.
Whoa, what are you suggesting?
We're back. As promised, this episode, we have 3 very, very special guests in the studio. We have Brenton Steenkamp, lead partner, heading up the Clayton Utz's cybersecurity practice. We have Andreas Ostenfeldt, director in their risk advisory practice. And their special guest, and my very, very special guest, Bladel, global director of insider threat at Uber, which I believe most people listening are probably quite familiar with. The Uber side, not the insider threat side. So look, before we get into the nitty gritty of this, because we are going to be talking insider threat, what it is, how to manage it, and all of that, Lou, you've had a bit of an interesting career to get where you are now. So can you briefly go over some of the highlights of where you started and how you got here?
Sure. So yeah, I spent 20 years in the FBI. Before the FBI, I was in an organization called NCIS, like the TV show, if they have that here in Australia.
There's even an Australian version now.
And then the year before that, I was in the U.S. Marshals. But most importantly, the FBI time. So my role in the FBI, I started in New York in a counterintelligence squad, where I was on a GRU, a Russian GRU squad, which we were trying to understand what Russian military intelligence was trying to steal from the UN. Did that through post 9/11. I was in New York City for 9/11. Interestingly, my youngest son we brought home from the hospital on the 10th of September, and we did live in Manhattan, so it was very real for us.
Wow.
But like everybody in the FBI, we all worked terrorism stuff as it popped up, whether it was the bombings in Kenya, Tanzania, whether it was Egypt Air, whether it was the World Trade Center. Went down to D.C. in the early 2000s, and that's when I got involved in espionage. And I kind of rose through the ranks. I was what's called a supervisory special agent, then a unit chief, then again a supervisor in the field, then what's called an ASAC, assistant special agent in charge. Then after that, I went back as a section chief where I ran the FBI's national counter-espionage program. And then my last gig, it was up in New York running our counterintelligence division. But I took that job because we had a spy within us, an insider threat. And our goal was to catch him. And there's an Australian nexus to that, and then get him removed. And so we were able to do all that. I was kind of nearing the end of my time in the FBI. I was one of these guys where I loved it. I wanted to do the job, but you knew when your shelf life was over. And so I thought after 25 years of law enforcement, it was probably time to move on. And ultimately, I had kids ready to go to college. And I needed to pay the bills. So, so that was the impetus for me to say, you know what, I think it's time for me to go. But while I was running our espionage program, I had either the joy or horror of working the Petraeus case, a bit of the WikiLeaks, but mostly Snowden.
Yep.
Snowden is where I really got involved in data loss, insider threat, big media leak type cases.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you decided to. Well, it's time to get a real job, but the real job is still insider threat.
Yeah, well, I think that once you have a certain pedigree, it's kind of hard to go out and be a plumber or something else next, right? So I did kind of stay close to home for what my experience was. But when we figured out how Snowden stole the data, our director at the time, Bob Mueller, literally tasked me with going out and explaining the case. And so it was odd for the FBI to comment on an investigation that was ongoing. This was the summer of 2013. But we also felt that there was a duty to warn. So I spent a lot of time out speaking about how he was able to steal, and also with government agencies, with corporate clients or corporate groups, and that's how EY had come to me. And I joined EY, where we helped set up an insider threat practice, where we actually counseled clients on what do you do about insider threat? How do you build a program?
Yeah,
And,
okay. I mean, so that's a pretty big career, and you've probably seen some fundamental changes in the threat landscape and how cyber criminals operate. What are some of the highline trends that you've seen in that time?
I think the way you got to think about it is that you think about a castle, right? The first thing you do around a castle is you build a moat. So consider that, your cyber defenses, you're protecting from external attacks. Once you have your moat built, what's next? Look internally. And so once you know that you have your external risks generally covered, then the next thing is who can do the most harm for any group. It's an internal person. Think about George Washington. His biggest fear was a spy. And so I think even though we're going back to the 1780s or 70s, that still holds true today. And so how do you insulate your organization, whether it's Uber, whether it's the FBI, about people stealing information that they have access to that they don't own?
Yeah. So the basics remain fundamentally the same.
Fundamentally the same. Tech makes it a lot harder now. As I was coming up working counterespionage, it was, I'll use Robert Hansen as an example. He took reams of paper with secrets on it and then gave those to the Russians in stacks of paper buried under a bridge. So, but that's how much you can copy, how much you can carry. Think about what a thumb drive holds. Snowden took 1.7 million documents, 1.7 terabytes worth of data. Think about the harm that can cause, whether it's a government agency or, of course, a corporate entity.
Yeah, okay. So let's dive a bit more specifically into insider threat here, and I'd love to hear your opinions as well. But I don't think many of our listeners understand how broad that threat category is. Can you outline some of the specific forms of insider threat you've experienced or seen?
Yeah, I'll start and then we'll kick it around. And so I think that you have to define who has access to the most important part of your company's information, the intellectual property, the source code, wherever that may be.
The crown jewels.
The crown jewels. And so once you understand who has access to it, then what is the employee population that could do harm or wants to do harm? People who are going to be fired, people are going to quit. People think that they have some sort of ownership rights to some sort of code they may have developed. And once you understand that, then you kind of put that network or net around that data. How do you watch that? At Uber, we're a Google shop, and we follow any exfiltration of data. If I were to email myself some information, my Uber email to my personal Gmail, that will trip our triggers. And so when you see that, our team's response is, "Hey, manager, Brenton just sent some information to his personal email. Is that appropriate? Is that allowed? Is this sensitive?" Uber is very good at classifying data, so we make sure that we know the level of it. Is it, for us, L1's most important, L2, L3, L4. If it's L1 and L2, is that allowed? And if it's not, then we kick it to our investigative team to figure out what's going on.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I think it's quite important just to realize that it's not only about the insider threat from an employee perspective or the stakeholder within the organization, but it's also the blast radius, David, so to speak, is now really extended to third parties. So the organization dealing with other contractors, part-time contractors, other third-party organization contracting to the business or the organization at large. What systems do they have access to, and what are they doing internally as well as a third party to mitigate potential risk? And I think Andreas and I have seen a number of these issues come to light that you might have the internal coverage, but what are you actually doing from a threat within by means of your external contact
inside that supply chain? I mean,
correct.
We just saw the UX hack a couple of weeks ago, which is a brokerage service which handles a lot of other brokers, and with one hack, that's like hundreds of organizations compromised and 500,000 customers compromised.
Yeah. Insider threat, I think it's also important to understand that insider isn't always intentional.
Yeah.
And so that I think everyone has to ask themselves when they're in an organization, am I the insider threat? Because you have, the category is everything from intent, which is I'm going to do this intentionally, either because it's financial motivation or you're disgruntled or whatever. But you could also just be grossly negligent, or you could just be unlucky, right? There's that big ample sort of range, and I think on a weekly basis we deal with a little bit of everything. And you could argue that the larger part is, oops, I did it by accident. Yeah. There's a part which is look, you clicked the phishing link 3 times and you haven't passed it, and this 4th one was actually a real one, right? And so you're grossly negligent. So you're still an insider threat, and companies having a hard time dealing with that in terms of culture from the very beginning. Right?
Yeah. I hate to admit it because I just realized I use my personal email a lot to get stuff off my phone and then transfer it to the business network, and that's absolutely what you're describing. Now I feel vaguely guilty about
But I think Andreas touched on a good point around culture, and I think maybe Lou, you could extend on that point. But culture is a critical part of how do you actually enhance your resilience to this issue. So it's treating it not only from a rogue employee perspective, but also what does that threat or risk landscape look like? So culture within the organization is fundamental, but also it boils down to the individual themselves as well.
The only point I'll bring up this is Andreas is 100% right. The non-malicious is the vast majority of insider threats. It doesn't make it any less secure. Like when you're sending yourself emails, if you're at a corporation that you have access to some of their crown jewels and you decide to email it to yourself, well, you may not intend for you to lose that, but it doesn't mean you're not going to. And because there are plenty of security protocols within whatever the network the company owns, but once it gets into your own network, then it's much, much different. And say you're accessing your information at a coffee shop, or you're going overseas, or whatever that may be, and you open up, Pandora's box for your corporation on the lack of a control of the information. And so that's something that people need to think about, and culturally, it's one thing to have an insider threat program within the FBI. We all got polygraphed every 5 years. We knew that it was trust but verify, right? And and so we knew we had to do that. When you get into the corporate world, I think that standard is much lower. And so when you think about the trust, there's the trust, but the verify aspect's the hard part. And so how do you want to verify what your employees are doing? And are you sure that the employees that you're hiring have gone through the enough of a background screen that you know what you're getting? And so I think that's something that culturally people have to get comfortable with. And it's not about a police state type thing. It's how do you protect your information? And it is a world market now, and the U.S. is a growth machine and a creation machine. In a lot of places, it's easier to steal from the U.S. than it is to create it themselves. And so I think that's something, and it's not just the U.S. You can pick a Western country. Yeah. Australia's proximity to China, that's a huge risk. And then what's the plan? Is there a plan to help protect it down?
Yeah. This is something you touched on, Andreas, but I'd like to dive into some of the motivations that turn somebody into an insider threat. I mean, you've got the accidental one, which I believe I might just be. But, aside from that accidental insider risk, what motivates someone to actively betray their company or organization?
The first thing, it's funny, it's really around departing employees. There's a Carnegie Mellon certification I actually did last week, which I figured after 30 some years of working this, maybe I should get certified. And it really is.
The FBI wasn't enough.
Well, exactly. I think I may have hit the basis, but
I can imagine you rocking up, going, "I'd like this certification." They look at your resume, sir.
But it's funny. One of the other students was like, "Do you just lead with Snowden all the time?" I'm like, "Well, as much as I loved and hated working the Snowden case, it was 13, 14 years ago." But it's still relevant today, which is shocking. And
you say that name, and people know what it is.
People know, right? And I think when you look at the certification, it's like, okay, how are corporations trying to figure out how to protect this, and how do you keep your employees up to speed? And a lot of insider work is around training. A lot of it is about people being comfortable, like, hey, you're going to be monitored. And monitoring sounds much more ominous than it really is. It just means that we're looking at the network. And I think that's a good way to kind of think about it.
Who's talking to who's accessing what, and do they have
permission? And who's actually what.
Yeah, but just back on motivations, right? I mean, we've worked on serious cyber incidents that were, just sabotage. And in that case, the motivation was simply just disgruntled. So I was working on one back in Colombia. It was a really important a company. They had a lot of money going in on a specific part of the year. And the IT administrator at the time had not been approved for their honeymoon, and was extremely disgruntled and decided to turn off services the day before they were going to do all their business. And so, that was millions and millions of dollars lost. And so that aspect, the human aspect of who has access to your crown jewels, but then are you actually monitoring, and not to be the police state, but is there a control framework in place to know what you would want to look for to understand whether someone may be a heightened risk You know,
we've just said no to this guy. Maybe we should have a look at their network traffic.
Yeah,
and we'll
right.
close that.
And I think, that brings me to the point to Andreas's point around what is our HR, what's the nexus between HR or human resources to the risk category involved, and where does that sit within the broader risk radar of the organization? Because the disgruntled employee is potentially a ticking bomb within the organization if things go wrong. I remember a matter I was involved in where the IT administrator had actually planted a malicious code within the network, so bringing down a number of point of sales because he wasn't promoted or overseen for promotion. And these were the triggers.
Yeah.
And it had a detrimental impact on not only the operations, but also on reputation, customer, liaison with, the organization with its customers and clients. And then secondly, a financial loss.
Wow, yeah, that's terrifying. And on top of that, one of the newest things that I've seen over the last 12 months are threat actors actively reaching out to people inside of an organization. We were talking about this earlier. The BBC reported that scattered lapses hunters tried to get on side. The fact they were advertising, hey, if you work inside a company or have access to data that we might want, reach out to us, we'll make it worth your while. Can you tell us a bit more about that really worrying aspect of people actively looking for insider threats?
Yeah, and I think that's something that people kind of discount a little bit, and this is a good thing to bring up. So in China, they have a program called the 1,000 Talents. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No, I haven't.
So the talent program is basically, you're educated in China, you'll get a job in a Western company, but then you have a requirement to report back to what you're doing. And so in a way, that's not necessarily asking somebody for their information, but it's you getting a job and then reporting back. And I think people need to understand what that threat really is, because if you have a person that gets in with a company, they spend 5, 10, 15 years there, think of the accesses as they continue on. And in your earlier question, like where do we see insider threats mostly? It's disgruntled employees. It's people that are leaving, people that are quitting or are going to be fired. Those are the ones you need to worry about. The nation state piece is interesting because there are many countries that don't have the abilities that a lot of the Western countries do. And if they have some sort of loyalty built in for where somebody was born, why not see if they can get them to respond to you? Why not see if they can help you get some information from a tech company, from a Microsoft, from wherever? And just do that. And then if you hit it, it's like hitting the jackpot.
Yeah.
And if you don't, what's the harm? And that's an area where I think most companies need to step back for a second and say, okay, what does our risk really look like? And are there nation states that are willing to reach out and see if they can target us, to find that disgruntled, to find that like-minded person, whether it's by birth or it's somebody that has some sort of angst against the company that they work for.
Yeah. Is there any angle of that where it might be the nation state going, hey, can you help? Or the nation state going, hey, we're going to apply pressure to you to help. So
Yeah, I think there's soft extortion. So I think
yeah.
that there are certain countries that aren't like Australia or the States where, hey, grandma needs to go to an old folks home. If you want to earn a good one, maybe you need to help us get something going on here.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something to think about. You can, think of the countries. We have restricted countries where we don't allow Uber employees to travel to, and we do that because they're risky, and we want to make sure that they don't go there. And so there's lots of different controls you can put into place, but you just need to be vigilant. And I think one of the things that a lot of companies are still struggling with is how do you train for that? Like, what's the process? And it's one thing on the cyber defenses on the wall around the company or the moat. It's another, okay, how do you look internally? Most of us have been conditioned our whole lives, hey, don't rat out your brother. If they did something, don't tell. But there should be a see something, say something aspect. And I know in the FBI, when we first started creating our insider threat program, we needed to find a way that people would report out what they thought was suspicious, not as a whistleblower, not as a tattletale, but hey, this is concerning behavior. Brenton's coming to work drunk every morning. I think that's unusual. What do we do with that?
Thank you.
Right? So I think there's areas that you can think it through, and then just imagine what kind of defenses you could put up.
Lou, I think I also, sorry, Brenton, I think another thing that we've noticed in certain companies where we had significant data breaches, and it has been an insider where it's borderline negligent or potentially intentional, and it's been very hard to determine that because the structure within the business, the culture within the business doesn't have a clear line on what is normal and what's not normal, what can you do and what can't you do. And so for some of these, let's call them insider operators, they're probably also able to take advantage of that, which is, oh, I made the mistake because I didn't really know, right? But or this, well, no one told me I couldn't do that. And so, for example, traveling to China or traveling somewhere else and using your laptop, you know, if the policy isn't clear and it doesn't say anything about you doing that, then that becomes troublesome.
I think we all just got paranoid about whether our phones were in silent or not.
Yeah, that's fine.
Brenton?
No, just to Andreas's point, I think from an Australian perspective, ASIO's reported, I think in their 25 report around this very constant threat we have, and we see the numbers increasing. I don't have the exact percentages, but it is a large concern to not only government as a whole, but you know, that the insider risk is high on the agenda of government, and we can't ignore this threat. So it's not going to only reside in government, but also within corporate. So that ticking time bomb may or may not occur, but the fact that it's still there is concerning.
Yeah, and you know, particularly now with Australia being part of the AUKUS Pact, you know, that's a lot of sensitive data now coming into the country, not just through government and defence, but also the corporations and the defence primes involved in all those projects. So it definitely has painted a target on our back, hasn't it?
Yeah, and as our cyber defences improve and you know, really understand what that risk profile looks like, you know, if you think back to anything, be it a fraud or a type of an influence, the human factor still is a key part of the chain. Yeah, and it's also the most vulnerable as well, in the sense of people've got a, let's call it a breaking point. I'll just use those words. And whatever it takes, people will exploit that, particularly if there's an adversary who is very determined, very slick, and very committed to making that happen.
Yeah, I think it's very easy for people to look at cybersecurity in general and think it's a technology problem, but it really is a people problem.
I mean, it's a people problem. If you look at the report from the Verizon data breach report, I know it's from 2025, but they kind of move cyclically, right? I think it's 60% of breaches have a human element, and that doesn't surprise anyone, I think. It wouldn't surprise me if it goes up from here, or at least stays the same. I don't see it going down. You know, cyber controls, you could argue AI is coming in and it's doing good things on both sides in terms of attacking but also protecting, but you know, the human element isn't changing at all. No. We're the ones that's staying quite primitive. So hacking the human is still, you know, very
probably
effective
your best
way.
bet, honestly. And while we're talking about insider threat and motivations where they come from, I think it's important to bring up North Korea, the fake IT worker thing, which I hadn't heard anything until before an identity company went, we got hit, we accidentally hired a North Korean hacker, and if it happens to them, it can really happen to anyone. So what's that situation looking like?
Yeah, I think it's more of a short-lived problem than a long-lived problem, and I think mostly because that there's lots of HR solutions for that. And you know, the remote work, at least in the States, was very popular, but that has totally turned on its head. Where, you know, most companies now require at least a hybrid, 2 or 3 days in the office. You know, just think about it. If you hire an IT worker, will make them come get the computer. I mean, if they're remote, you know, like what's the protocol around it? Remote where? I mean, like what's that look like? How many computers have been sent to the same address? There's lots of different things that can be solved. But really it goes back into the HR hygiene. Did somebody interview somebody ahead of time? We talked earlier, make sure it's not a deep fake, make sure they put their hands in front of their face. You know, or in a video, if it's a video.
I don't even consider that as such a simple solution.
And there's lots of simple. Exactly. And then,
or show me the window outside. Show me what how what does the weather look like?
Or today's paper. Well, that's almost like an old school kidnapping thing. But ultimately, there's lots of solutions, and I think the IT worker issue was huge. Certainly in the States a year and a half ago, it's really waned because people are like, well, wait a minute, this isn't hard to solve. Like let's get this figured out. And if there's an IT worker that's that valuable, we'll give them an airline ticket to come see you. I mean, because it just doesn't make any sense that you're going to give them access. And then I know the studies on the IT program, the North Korean IT program, they didn't steal any or install much malware. It was all about money.
Yes, exactly.
And their salaries were going to the North Korean treasury. And it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars, which is a huge success for North Korea. But the scheme of things, it's more of a foolish lack of HR hygiene problem on Western companies.
Yeah. Have we seen anything like that in Australia?
I've not personally been involved in, but there is talk where some organisations have been exposed, but I don't have any facts to prove that.
I think what we are seeing is more demand for understanding deepfakes. and understanding where that is going. So, for example, if we speak about the North Korean regime, I think you're right in the sense that the world is changing, people are coming back to the office, but what isn't changing is deepfakes. And so, a couple of years ago, it took hours or days to generate a quite trustworthy video or quite trustworthy piece of voice that's down to seconds or minutes now, right? And you can go for a couple of bucks, you can generate that. And so I do think we're coming into a world now where distinguishing between what's real and what's not, if you're not physically engaged, is going to be really tricky. And so from a threat perspective, even from an insider threat perspective, that's going to be one of the big topics going forwards, I think.
What can CISOs do to address the issue? Is there a solution? And how can they sell that solution to their boards and CEOs?
I think, and I'll put my EY hat on for a minute. So many of the cases that we worked in EY forensics was there was some sort of event that occurred that required an investigation. We would do the investigation, and then our response would be, okay, how can we help this client mitigate whatever that was? For the CISOs or CISOs, I think that they need to think, number one, what do they want to protect? What is the most important thing for the company? And then once they identify that, second step, who has access to that? And so once you understand what that threat landscape looks like, and then so you know what you want to protect, you know who has access, now who's motivated? Is there a group that may be motivated on stealing this? The people that are getting kicked out of the company or fired or quitting or whatever that may be. Disgruntlements, if there's some sort of, a competition type thing where they want to go to a competitor, whatever the issues are. And once you kind of map that out, and it doesn't need to be a formal map out, but I think you need to just kind of understand what that looks like. Then what are the controls? Yep. So, data, whether it's good or bad, whether it's AI or how do you hold data, there's solutions to everything. It's just a matter of what do you want to do, but not impact, the speed of business. But you can see, like, whether it's exfil of data, you can see what's going on in your network without slowing anything down. Once you see something, then you immediately get involved. And I think that's really where the solution lies. Culturally, it is a bit of a shift. Like I said, it's not hard for the FBI to say we're going to monitor you, and you're not going to have a problem with that because you expect it. But if you're at a company, you may not like that, or you may think it's more nefarious than it really is, but then explain it. Like when we do training, when we did training for companies that are thinking about insider threat, we talked about the value of being transparent. If you create a covert program, you are creating more problems than you're solving. If you do a transparent program, hey, I work for General Motors. This program's called General Motors Protect, whatever you want to name it. And then this is what we're trying to do because we want to save everyone's job. We want to keep us all moving forward. People buy into that. And I know when we did this in the FBI, when we started creating our insider threat program, people are like, well, that makes sense. Why wouldn't we do this? And I'll bounce back even to that. Every spy case I ever had anything to do with, when we interviewed everyone around the person that was accused of spying, everybody we interviewed, hey, did you know that Brenton was a spy? I knew it all along. And you're like,
Because he was coming to work drunk, of course.
Because he was coming to work drunk, but it's one of those things that there was so many clues, and everyone's like, well, then our next question is, well, why didn't you say something? And they're like, well, I just didn't think it was my place, or I didn't have a mechanism to report it. And I think for the CISOs, they need to figure out what's the appropriate mechanism. Is it a whistleblower? Is it, reportinsider.com, whatever it may be, but there's got to be a mechanism where people don't feel like they're ratting anybody out, that they're just raising a concern. And a lot of the more, mature insider programs, it's really almost like an employee assistance program where people feel like, oh, listen, they're worried about Brent coming drunk every day. So what are we going to do about that? Let's see if we can get him some help before there's a bigger problem.
Yeah.
But David, I think your question is good in the sense, I want to take it one step further. I don't think it's only the CISOs. It's really a tone at the top, so it has to come through from the C-suite. That it's a culture, it's a change in behavior, trust but verify, and that should actually take it all the way through from, considering do we need an insider threat or risk program within our broader risk culture, and get that embedded into the enterprise risk register of the organization, and it starts with that type of top-down approach, and really, to your point, Lou, to be embedded throughout the organization as a whole. That's probably critical, and not only within the organization, but to extend to third parties as well.
Yeah.
I think, too, you got to think that the CISO's role is really around the technical aspect of it, but the other role is around the human being. And so you got to figure out what is motivating your workforce to take from you, if anything. And if there is something, can we solve that? And so is it some companies will lay off a certain percentage annually. Was that a good idea? I mean, like how do you do that? How do you make people buy into whatever the company's producing? To say, listen, I'm part of this team. I want to make sure I can help protect this. And I think, I'm of the age where I stayed in the FBI 25 years, right? So I'm not a job jumper generally. But I see, the more modern workforce, and I'll use my kids as an example. They'll work for a couple of years for a place, and they'll go somewhere else for a couple of years. And a lot of that, there's no longer the pensions, there's no longer the longevity type employment aspects. But I think people just need to understand that. And as important as the CISOs are, I think you also need to think about the chief security officer, but also the HR directors.
Gotcha.
And so, okay, how do we make our employees think that they're part of something, and how do they stay with the program?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you also want to make sure those systems of reporting are frictionless, right? Like any part of cybersecurity, you want to make it easy
As
and
possible, yeah.
as possible. Yeah. I feel like it'd be a waste of the time I have with you right now. If we move away from insider threats for a moment, to talk about the international threat landscape and how the conflict in Iran might be shaping that. Cyber activity is now just a part of any kind of kinetic conflict. So what kind of broad observations might you have on what we can expect that landscape to look like over the next weeks and months?
I think for the next weeks, I think you really have to harden your moat. I think that there is going to be a flurry of desperation, probably from the Iranian regime. Obviously, they're under siege at this point. And so look at where or if there are any vulnerabilities to your network. And if you believe that there are, how do you harden that? We used to do a lot of red team exercise where we would map out an attack. And then how does a company control that attack? And I'll go back to my UI hat again. When we would do the red team exercises, there's lots of times when we would do this at the C-suite level, they weren't even sure who was in charge. And so like if you don't know who's in charge, how are you possibly going to remediate the threat? And so I think mapping those things out, going to a firm like Clayton Utz, how can you help us red team? Let's test our systems out, because there's a lot of times people may have a system and they haven't tested it. The first red team I did, it became a shouting match between the head of security and the press person on who's in charge. And as they're going at it, I remember the C-suite looking at everybody like, I can't believe this is happening. And I was the moderator at this for this event. And I was like, the bad thing is that that's happening, but here's the good news. It's happening during an exercise.
It's happening on tabletop, not
exactly.
live.
So
Yeah.
I think that's what they need to think about.
Yeah.
You can argue on how long this is going to go war-wise, but I think that the immediate flurry is where you need to throw up your best defenses.
Yeah.
And then maybe, say a month, we're talking weeks, now let's go to the months, maybe start thinking about some red teams on where do you think you may have some vulnerabilities, and test it. And so once you test it, then you're going to find your solution pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And Andreas, you had a good point on cloud.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to the cloud, but geopolitics in general, whenever there's a conflict, it doesn't have to be around, like it's around right now. At least online, it looks like Iran has been shaping up their defensive, sort of their attacker skills in terms of a cyber attack skills. There's a couple of threat actors there that seem to be state-sponsored. Some of those, there's reports that they're much better now at social engineering, right? There's reports of some of these that are going from a hacktivism perspective specifically for communities that are some way tied to that geopolitical conflict. If you're a Western company right now and you haven't assessed whether you have some kind of ties to business or anything that has to do with the Iranian conflict, I think you would be wise to right now check up on that, because they will be going for these kind of companies, not necessarily for financial gain, just to get in there and just to wipe your systems, cause chaos as part of the conflict. So the disruption for the disruption stake. And I think if you go back into insider threat, that's exactly where you'll have some issues. They're very well known for doxing as well. Doxing is you get information on someone and you pressure them, and so it doesn't always have to be financially motivated. You could just have some dirt on someone, and if you pressure them enough, maybe they're willing to give you something. Yeah. Another interesting thing that happened last week out of this conflict is the Amazon Web Center data centers were not bombed, but they were affected. I think one of them was actually hit. Yeah,
you
by
said
a bomb.
this combination of kinetic and cyber.
Sure. Yeah. And so again, you think, well, if you're a company and you're placing all your eggs in one basket, which is what we tend to do now. You know, we're Australian sovereign. We want to have our information within Australia.
Yeah.
But what happens if all the data centers in your region are, you know, out of power? It's not about backups. You can't even get to the other backup anymore, right?
yeah.
So there's one point where you go, well, where's my data? Well, it's physically no longer available. It was bombed.
Yeah,
And so I think we're also moving into an interesting new era here of targeting data centers. You know, going back to AI, which is extremely data center hungry.
Yeah.
How, you know, if you want to turn off, you know, the power of a region or a nation, you go for the
Not
data
every
centers.
You said old saying, "There's no such thing as a cloud, only somebody else's hardware."
Yeah.
Exactly.
Brendan.
No, I concur with Andreas's point, and I think it's, again, what does that risk radar and that risk landscape look like, and have you properly assessed it? And back to Lou's original point, you need to start, you know, get the culture right, trust but verify. So, and we can't ignore it anymore.
Yeah, a very interesting angle that I wanted to come back to, and that's agentic AI as insider risk. Do you want to expand on that one?
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone's installing agents, everyone's using AI, and at the moment, I think most companies are struggling with access, which is how much access does it need to do what it needs to do? And the answer is it's got access to a whole bunch of things. So I think the other thing about agentic AI and neural networks is we're kind of building it in our own image, which is we want these little synthetic humans who can do and think and, you know, do things we do. And so you can argue, you know, how, and, you know, and there's already security researchers who have fooled AI agents into doing things that they shouldn't do by role playing and so on. So the question becomes, you know, right now insider threat is a human element, but at one point have we built small little tiny human acting robots that can be manipulated in the same way, right? But with all access.
Won't even know they're being manipulated.
Yeah, and I think maybe
care,
I mean
or care.
yeah,
Yeah,
they don't care.
Yeah, you can't really code that kind of loyalty. Where do you stand on
Yeah, I think-
agentic AI? Because I imagine Uber is making a lot of use of it.
Well, and that's most companies want their employees to use AI as much as possible because it does make you that much more efficient. And then there's the two prong: is it for good or is it for bad? If I go to AI and say, okay, how can I help me steal as much information that I can from my company? Well, AI is going to do it. They don't care. They're going to respond to the task. And
Good
so
question,
I
Lou.
think,
Very intelligent.
yeah, exactly. How do we do this?
Exactly.
So I think that's what you need to think about. Like,
Yeah.
can it be used for something evil as well as something good?
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's been thought through. I think people say, use AI, it'll make you more productive, go.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, but what about the guy that doesn't want to do it for the right things?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I think that adds to the complex view around insider risk.
Yeah.
Because with agentic AI or AI as a whole, it's speed, it's scale, but critically, it's stealth.
Yeah.
And not only that, it's really, it can scale in such a way that you may, you know, from an insider risk perspective, you rely on maybe a human or one or two or three people. But with you know, technology, be it neural technology, as Andreas referred to, the impact can be quite severe.
Yeah.
So it's not only trusting the code, but who's writing the code. Have we considered that as part of the risk landscape? And I think these are the types of questions we need to think about in terms of when we say, yes, trust but verify. Are we including that within the ambits of the risk assessment?
Well, I'm sure that's giving everybody listening a lot to think about. Andreas, Brenton, Lou, thank you for coming in today. We really appreciate it.
Great,
Thank you.
Thanks.
And welcome back to the Cyber Uncut podcast. What an absolute joy it was to catch up with Lou Bladel, 20-year veteran of the FBI. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I'm sitting where you are now and chatting to him, and he's talking about being on the Edward Snowden case. And I'm like,
Unbelievable.
unbelievable. And I'm like, don't say you agree with Snowden. Don't say you agree with Snowden. You probably won't like that. And then we wandered out to the break area and pointed out Sydney Harbour to him and the naval base across the way. He thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And of course, Andreas and Brenton from Clayton Utz. Thank you for joining us. Now, we're going to close out the pod. We do have what we consider to be some good news.
Yeah.
The United Kingdom has rejected their own social media ban.
Yeah, so they were toying up the idea of a social media ban in the same style of what we've got here. So, a bit of background. Our social media ban came into effect December last year. Under 16s can't access things like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, and more.
Yeah.
And now, as well as pornographic sites like Pornhub and stuff like that. Now, our government has been really supportive of its ban. Despite the critiques and despite pointing out its flaws, they've gone, we're really happy with it. We're really, really pushing it. We've been the first in the world. Blah, 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 blah. Now, MPs in the UK have voted, after it was proposed by, I don't remember who. Let me restart. Similar social media ban was proposed in the UK by one MP. And MPs have voted in a majority against having that legislation put in place.
Yeah.
They have pushed instead for flexible ministerial powers. So Conservative minister, former Minister John Nash was who brought the social media ban idea up. So there are a number of critics of the ban that have pointed out similar flaws to what we have. So the UK's National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, or the NSPCC, they warned that banning these platforms could potentially push children to places where the ban doesn't reach.
Which you and I have talked about before, places like 4chan.
Yes, which is not included for some reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, to much more dangerous places. Early Education Minister Olivia Bailey urged MPs to reject the ban, obviously before the vote. And this ban was going to be in the form of an amendment to the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill.
Yeah.
And Bailey was the one that pushed for a more flexible regulatory framework. So she said, many parents and campaign groups have called for an outright ban on social media for under 16s. Others, including children's charities, have warned that a blanket ban could drive children towards less regulated corners of the internet or leave teenagers unprepared when they do come online. That is why last week the government launched a consultation to seek views to help shape our next steps and ensure children can grow up with a safer, healthier, and more enriching relationship with the online world. So the vote was 307 to 173, so 134 majority.
Yeah.
Now, this doesn't mean that a ban won't happen.
But it means that this ban won't happen, and it'll have to take another form. But what I like there is that focus on not outright banning it, but education.
Yes.
Is what you and I always come back to, is that can't we keep our kids safe? Can't we educate them, provide them with the tools to navigate this complex space?
Yes. Look, the main reason a ban could still happen, the Commons is supporting the Secretary of State getting additional powers in this space. So this amendment in lieu could allow Science Secretary Liz Kendall, I can't speak today, to, in quotes, restrict or ban children of certain ages from accessing social media services and chatbots, as well as limit access to addictive platforms and features, like you'd see on TikTok.
Yeah.
Change the age of digital consent and restrict the use of VPNs.
Oh, that last one's a bit worrying.
Yeah,
because that feels like a real thin end of the wedge to me.
It is. So 107 MPs actually abstained from voting entirely.
Oh, wow.
So MP Sadiq Al-Hassan said, and I think they're trying to weigh up the benefits and the drawbacks of something like this. So Sadiq Al-Hassan said, parents like me are locked in a daily battle that they simply cannot win alone, fighting platforms that have been specifically designed to keep children hooked. If a drug were causing such measurable harm for 78%, it would be withdrawn, reformulated, or placed behind a counter with strict controls on who could access it. We have an identifiable source, we have overwhelming evidence of harm, and we have the power to act.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, sticking to the drug metaphor, banning drugs doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and look, even Albo mentioned this in our ban, talking about how, we do have a ban on children younger than 18 purchasing alcohol, but they still find ways around it, of course. So it's interesting that they've acknowledged that. But I think more interesting is the idea that they seem to be having a far more nuanced conversation about it in the UK.
Yeah, I think, look, we've, gotten the lovely trophy of being the first in the world.
And we know the world's watching us. Governments around the world have looked at what we've done to see if they can learn from it.
We were lucky enough to benefit a little bit from the UK's really rushed age verification that they introduced, which is now what we've done. We don't seem to have learned anything.
No.
But now the UK can watch us and learn from our mistakes. And it seems that a lot of those MPs are going, we don't want this because it's not working.
It comes back to that question of nuance, and there's nothing nuanced about what we're doing. It's just cut and dried. Yes, no, that's it. And it's there are far more grey areas involved. You and I have talked about in the pod many times.
Yeah.
And also the way our own feelings about this have changed
Yeah, of
over
course.
time. I
Feel
think
free
we
to
were kind
ignore
of,
our opinions.
Yeah, I know you may well change again.
Yeah.
But it is complex, and it must be said that neither you or I have children, so it could be argued that we don't have any skin in the game.
Yes, that's true.
But nonetheless, I do feel strongly that we're not going about this the right way here in Australia.
I don't have an answer on how to do it.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to be a fence sitter or, devil's advocate, just trying to, poo-poo any government ideas. But this doesn't seem...
This seems
right.
a positive move from the UK, I've got to say.
I agree.
Yeah.
And for me, it's good news. It's same as ALO's suggestion on age verification that these things need to be done at device and app level. Maybe there's something we can do there. Because, of course, there's still those security issues in terms of data collection for age verification.
Yeah.
But in terms of ensuring that kids are only seeing what they should see, what do you do?
What do you do? We don't have the answers. If we did, we'd probably be paid far, far better and not be doing this podcast right now. I think that's all we have for you today. It's a short amount of time with Dan and I, but hopefully everybody listening really enjoyed our discussions with Clayton Utz and Lou Bladel. We'll be back next week. You should absolutely sign up to our newsletter. You should check us out on cyberdaily.au. You can also find Dan on aidaily.au. You can find us on socials, and both of us... My God, will both of us be back next week?
We actually will.
2 weeks in a row together.
I know, insane.
I'm so happy. All right, we hope you enjoyed listening to us, and we'll be back next week. Bye-bye.
See ya.